everyone, this is Grandmaster Eugene Perelshteyn, and today I'm going to continue with part 2 of the topic facing unorthodox openings. For example, in the first part, my opponent played a very unusual, so I'm playing white d4, c5, d5, b5 pawn move, which he actually probably regretted later on in the middle game. In this game, I'm playing black, and my opponent starts out so far with normal setup. d4, knight f6, knight f3, g6. And now he's clearly uncomfortable going for some main lines of the King's Indian, so he plays this move b3. Now, this is less unorthodox as move 2 b5 in the d4 lines, but nevertheless, b3, you don't get your basically typical King's Indian if you're black, right? I mean, the whole idea of King's Indian is to get a powerful bishop on the long diagonal h8, a1. And now white is saying, no way, I'm going to contest your bishop on g7 with my bishop on b2. So this is a little bit unorthodox. So let's see what happened next. So bishop g7, bishop b2, castles, knight bd2. Alright, so at this point I have to make a very important decision. Do I play d6, followed by very similar King's Indian play with trying to get e5 or c5? Or do I switch plans and try to take advantage of this early b3, bishop b2 move? I mean, there has to be a reason why top grandmasters don't play this b3, bishop b2 against the King's Indian. So I think I found a way to try kind of the antidote for the system over the board. First, I play d5. So my whole strategy from now on is directly aimed against this, should I say, weakening pawn structure and this bishop on b2. So let's see what happens next. e3. So he's about to play, of course, bishop e2 or bishop d3 and castle, finish his development. The position is very kind of timid looking, there are no tactics, the position of struggle. And now I think is a very interesting decision that I made. Again, remember, my strategy is aimed against the queenside pawn structure, h2, b3, c2, and the bishop on b2. And with my next move, I really underline a5. Very unusual for a King's Indian. Of course, this is a totally different setup with the bishop on b2. But nevertheless, I think a5 is very instructive and interesting way to play this position. So clearly, I just want to play a4 and put black in a very uncomfortable situation. Does he take on a4 and ruin his pawn structure? Does he not take and allow me to take on b3 or even play a3? So all these decisions he has to now consider. And furthermore, does he play a3 or a4 to try to stop me? So let me explain to you my reasoning. So if he doesn't want to allow a4 and he plays a4 himself, he basically makes a very strong positional concession. Why? Well, the reason is, in this type of pawn structure, to activate the bishop, you really need to play c4. When you played a4, you made the commitment that after you play c4, the square b4 is going to be weak, and my knight will just walk into b4 and say, thank you very much for a free square. And of course, if you don't play c4, then the setup is not as great. Now, if you play a3, then after a4, again, c4 is not as pleasant because you're going to get all these problems after a takes b, and b4 weakens light squares. So all these reasons, I think, explain why a5 is such an interesting idea. So let's see what happened next. So bishop d3, normal looking move, a4, just as I planned, c4. So he decides to go for his plan and just kind of avoid my pawn on a4. which is reasonable because I don't really want to take on b3 just yet. I don't really want to play a3 and kind of commit myself. And then what? How am I going to follow up? This could potentially become a problem. So for now, I simply strengthen up my center position with the move c6. So now my opponent decides to take advantage of my two tempi loss, a5, a4, and plays knight e5. But in reality, this, I think, is not such a great move. I simply develop my knight, knight bd7. Well, he wants to secure the knight on e5 with f4, which makes sense. But in reality, I think black gets a very good play. So I think knight e5, f4 is not such a great idea. And I simply take and play knight g4. By the way, this idea takes on e5 or knight g4 is very common in Slav openings when black has the c6, d5 pawn structure. Sometimes the pawn is on a6, and this happens. So now, with the bishop on b2, the pawn on e3 gets to be vulnerable. He really has to play queen e2 to defend it. And now I have a very nice choice. I can play bishop h6 and attack that pawn even more, or as I played in the game, f6. He plays h3. Of course, he doesn't want to have my knight lurking out there. And I have a very nice rerouting plan for my knight. Knight h6, takes, pawn takes, castle. All right, so we are now on move 15, and let us try to evaluate white's strategy in the opening. So he wanted to challenge my dark square bishop with b3, bishop b2, and I changed up my plan. Instead of d6 followed by e5 or c5, I played d5, a5, a4. This is limiting the bishop on b2. Basically, he has no future. Furthermore, this is fixing the queen side. My opponent tried to take advantage of my slow opening play with knight e5, but as a result, he's got a backwards pawn on e3, which is a weakness. I got a half-open e-file. My knight can jump into the game, and he's got all these weak squares. So I think the opening battle has not gone well for white. So let's see what happens next, how I take advantage of all these weaknesses. So of course, rook e8 is a reasonable move. I take advantage of the half-open e-file, and I pin the queen. Queen f3, he wants to break the pin. Knight f5, very good idea. Now, my knight that does absolutely nothing on h6, jump into the game with the tempo, hitting the pawn. Rook e1. And now, we kind of reached the next stage of my plan. How do I strengthen my position? That's the question. And the way to do that is now to activate my bishop, bishop h6. So it turns out that the bishop that was supposed to challenge my bishop got locked down on b2 and absolutely has no future. e3 is a real weakness, and pretty much out of necessity he has to do this. But of course now I got two powerful bishops, light squares, are in full control of my f5 bishop. He can never play e4, and the position is just terrible, terrible for white. So from now on, it's a matter of technique. He decides to take on d5, but the opening of the c file doesn't really help him. Again, taking on the a4 only ruins his pawn structure even more. Now we got 1, 2 weaknesses. This bishop again has no future. The knight has no future. And I got the two bishops. So knight b3, and now a very good way to restrain the knight is b6. Now I basically got all the time in the world to improve my pieces. So he plays rook e2. Unclear exactly what he wants to do. Probably he just wants to defend, I'll say. Queen d6. I really like this multi-purpose move. I'm taking away the g3 square from his queen, as well as controlling the diagonal. And slowly, little by little, you will see that black is improving his pieces, whereas white is running out of moves. Bishop c3. Perhaps he wants to come down and activate the bishop. but there is simply no time. Rook c4, bishop d2, bishop e1 is nothing special. I can just play bishop e4, or even stronger, I can win right away with the move bishop d3, because this pawn is lost. So bishop d2 is pretty much forced. Bishop e4, improving my light square bishop. Queen f2, and now f5. This is a picturesque position and winning strategy for black. I got pretty much every single piece on the best square possible, whereas every white's piece is just totally passive, absolutely has no future. Look at these pieces. The rook on a1, the rook on a2. You know, the rooks love open files. Now look what white did to his own rooks. Bishop is passive, knight has no future, queen is passive. So now it's the next stage of the game is how do I take this great position and convert it into something better. So a3, you know, perhaps he wants to play bishop b4. And now bishop d3, rook e1. By the way, bishop b4 didn't work in lieu of bishop takes rook, and bishop takes e3, and again black is winning. So bishop d3, rook e1. Again, he does have time for bishop b4 after rook c2. With every move, I improve my pieces even more and take away more squares from my opponent. Bishop b4. He decides to simplify the position going to the endgame. Of course, whenever you have a cramped position, it's a good idea to simplify down into an endgame. You know, even if you lose a pawn in the process, perhaps you have some fighting chance there. Unfortunately, that's not the case here. Rook takes queen, bishop takes queen, rook b2, hitting the knight. Well, it turns out that he can't stop both threats at the same time. The pawn on e3 is going to get lost, or the knight on b3. So he saves the knight, and I simply take the pawn with check, and my opponent resigned. And actually the main reason why he resigned, if we follow this line a little bit further, king h1, I have this very nice tactical idea, bishop e4. And it turns out that he can never take the bishop because bishop takes g2, and then the rook is gone. And pretty much after bishop e4, due to this weakness, position is hopeless. This is hanging. So it's actually a good time to resign. Now, if he plays some other move, well, let's say he plays king h2. Well, then he runs into another problem. What's the other problem? Well, the other problem is after bishop e4, rook takes g2 check. And again, white is in serious trouble. So you see all this pretty much as a result of suspicious opening strategy for white. So even though b3, bishop b2 is not a mistake per se, I kind of took advantage of it by playing d5, a5, a4, and then with knight e5, my opponent allowed me to create a second weakness, you know, knight bd7, knight takes e5, knight g4, and f6, and once he traded the e pawn for the f pawn, pretty much I had a free attack on the e3 pawn, and my pieces had great squares, and my strategy had a beautiful position as a result of the strategy when I got to move, when I played f5 to move 25. And 5 moves later, after I played f5, my opponent had to resign. So this illustrates that unorthodox opening play, especially pawn weaknesses, you have to be very vigilant and kind of think outside the box and try to figure out a way to punish your opponent. Why? Because most likely these very unorthodox openings have some kind of a flaw. Once you figure out that flaw and you have a very strong centralized strategy against it, very specific plan, then I think you can be very successful. So again, I thank you very much, and good luck.
This is Grandmaster Damian Lemos here for onlinechesslessons.net. First of all, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you would like to receive more free chess videos from us, you can just click the subscribe button below. I would also highly recommend signing up for my free mail course, the 10 Grandmaster Secrets to Dominate Chess. During this exclusive course from onlinechesslessons.net, I'll share with you my own Grandmaster shortcuts to effective attacking, defending, and growth hacks to improving your chess without complicated books or memorization. So sign up by clicking the sidebar on the right, and I know you won't be disappointed. Once more, this is Damian for onlinechesslessons.net, and I'll see you in my videos. Thank you.